Howdy y'all, welcome back to this second lecture of our course, Creation, Creativity, and Recreation, a Religious Quest. In our first lecture, I gave you just a quick introduction to the phenomenological method, but today we're going to dive more deeply into it, and we're going to go over all the steps of the phenomenological method, and I'll actually begin to put it into practice. Like I've said before, the phenomenological method is a method, it's a skill, it's something that you have to practice in order to get good at it. It's something that we are using throughout this course, throughout this semester, and it takes not only a basic understanding of what it is, but also a lot of practice to put it into practice. So we're going to do that today. So first, what is the phenomenological method? Where do we begin? Well, the first step is to shake your liquid marker. Actually, no, the first step is step 0. I like to call it step 0 because step 0 is to draw a circle. I call it step 0 because it is actually a 0. It is a circle, but also 0 is fucking awesome. And so I really like 0, and we're going to talk more about 0 later. But for now, all we need to know is to draw a circle. Step 1 is to identify my perspectival starting point. Identify your perspectival starting point. Where are you coming from? Where am I coming from? Now, when I say I mean I. But when you say I, you mean... See, that was a professor joke. Yeah, that was a joke. Why? It didn't seem like a joke? Just because my jokes aren't funny doesn't mean they're not jokes. It was a phenomenology joke. Speaking of jokes, the other day my daughter had a friend over and we were eating sausages. I made some breakfast. While we were eating the sausages, I said, you know, in Germany, sausages are the worst. And they all just stared at me. And then I said, ha, it's a German joke. And then they all thought that was very funny. German jokes, phenomenology jokes, professor jokes, dad jokes. I got them all. By the way, what do you get when you cross a professor joke with a dad joke with a German joke? All right, so what I did there was just model the entire phenomenological method for you. I told you we were going to learn what it is, but also put it into practice. So there, I modeled the whole thing for you. But if it went by too quickly, I'll go through it again a little bit more detail, step by step. So step 1, sorry, already screwed up. Step 0, draw a circle. Did that. Step 1, identify your perspectival starting point. I already told you a lot about myself. I'm not going to tell you anything more about myself right now, other than that very entertaining German joke story. But it brings us to step 2, which is to identify the phenomenon. So what is the phenomenon in this case? So step 2 is to identify the phenomenon. Whatever that thing is that we're going to study, and we're going to put this in the center of our circle. Whatever the phenomenon is, the thing that we're studying. So in this case, we're going to put the phenomenon at the center of the circle, which obviously is the joke is funny. All right, so the joke is funny. So obviously we know that the joke is funny, but it's not just the joke itself, but the funniness of the joke that we're interested in, right? So we have to be careful to distinguish between the phenomenon, which is the funniness of the joke, versus the joke itself, which...
etymological derivation of the word verse, etc.
But in this case, the joke is funny. So why is the joke funny, right? Well, first of all, funny for whom? Well, it's clearly funny
To me.
wicked funny to me. Who else would find this joke funny? Well, people who know German and English. But, you know, maybe not everybody who knows German and English, because some people who are native German speakers, they may not find it particularly funny. They may say, in Germany, sausage is the worst, and some German person may say, ja, this is true, in Germany, sausage is the worst, and it is also the best. Another phenomenology joke. It's also a German joke. Definitely a dad joke. In Germany, sausage is the worst, and it's also the best. So, it's funny for me. It's also funny for anybody who knows German and English, but, you know, maybe not so funny for people who know German and English extremely well, or for whom, you know, Germany is their first language. So, you know, it's not going to be funny for everyone. Admittedly, it's going to be funny, you know, for a small group of people. But then outside of that group of people, there were also a number of other people, such as my kids, who also found the joke funny, right? Not because of the joke was funny, but because they found it funny, that I found it funny, that it was funny, right? So the joke was funny in and of itself. It was inherently funny, but it was also funny because they found it funny, that I found it funny, despite their fact that they didn't understand why it was funny. Right? The joke is funny. Phenomenology. It's funny. All right, you know what? Let's just start over because I messed up my circle, and also I just kind of enjoy drawing circles because they're also zeros. All right, step 0, draw a circle. Step 1, identify our perspectival starting point. Step 1, identify the phenomenon, the thing itself, the thing that we're trying to figure out. What is it? So identify the phenomenon, whatever this thing is that we're trying to investigate. Now, it might seem like we want to very clearly identify what this thing is, but in fact, that's not what we want to do. We want to sort of vaguely identify what the phenomenon is. If we presume to know exactly what it is and clearly define it, then there's no point in doing the phenomenological investigation, right? So we are doing an investigation of something that we don't know in order to know that thing. So we want to begin by saying, well, there's a thing here, right? So what is this thing? Let's try and just start with a word and sort of a vague idea. There's this kid who teaches, there's this professor who teaches at Boston University, Robert Neville. He says, we need to begin with some sort of vague categories and keep our categories kind of vague so that we know generally what area we're looking in together, so that we're kind of looking in the right direction towards the right thing. But we don't want to clearly define that category from the beginning or even at the end, because the whole point is to understand this phenomenon as it is experienced or seen from a variety of varying perspectives. So that brings us to step 3. Step 3 is listen. Step 3 is listen. Step 3 is listen. You know what? Let's write all these down. Step 0, draw a circle. Step 1, identify where I'm coming from, what we might call a perspectival starting point. Step 2, vaguely identify the phenomenon. We're going to talk more later about the difference between the thing itself, the Ding an sich, and the phenomenon, or the way that that thing appears to our conscious mind. We are absolutely going to dive into that, but we're not quite there yet. For now, let's just call it we're vaguely identifying this thing as in just using this word, phenomenon. Step 3 is listen. Listen. Well, listen requires a direct object. So listen to whom? To whom are we going to listen? Well, let's start by listening to the experts, the people that really know what they're talking about, the people who, and by experts I really mean scholars. Scholars are a good place to begin. The people who really understand what they're talking about. People who've spent their entire lives studying topics in detail, that spent their entire careers, diving into topics, learning languages and understanding cultures and whatever it is that this person is an expert in. They've devoted their entire adult lives, their entire careers to studying this thing and becoming an expert in it. So why wouldn't we begin by listening to those experts, right? By hearing the voices of those who really know what they're talking about, who really have some insights to share with us. So listen to the experts. Now, the more experts we listen to, the better. Every once in a while, you may come across an expert who's kind of an outlier, right? Like an idiosyncratic thinker, by expert number, 420 or so. You may find someone who's just sort of pointing in the other direction, right? So they're not even pointing at this phenomenon, but they're like out in left field. They're pointing somewhere else. Now, as I'll explain later, it's still important to listen to those folks. Absolutely need to listen to those voices, particularly give them some credence for their expertise. And the reasons that we may not understand why they're talking about may have to do with them or may have to do with us. We'll come back to that. That's right at the heart of phenomenology. All right, so step 3A, listen to experts. We don't want to just listen to the experts. We also want to listen to people who have a certain amount of experience. Now, who are those people who have experiences in particular phenomenon? Well, in a lot of cases, when we're talking about religion, certainly some of those people who have religious experiences are going to be our neighbors, right? The people who live next door, the people who live around the block, the people who live across the country, the people who live around the world, right? But our neighbors in this world, other humans who've had various experiences, it's good to listen to the experts, but also to listen to our neighbors, right? To listen to our neighbors. Right? So step 0, draw a circle. Step 1, identify where am I coming from? Where are you coming from? What are you bringing to the table? Where are you coming from? Just as I went over in the first introduction, right? We're thinking about the die. So from your perspective, you may see a 3, and from my perspective, see a 4. Therefore, it's important, it's essential that we identify where we are coming from, so that I know where you're coming from and you know where I'm coming from, because what we're really interested in is seeing this phenomenon that we put in between us, right? And we want to try and see it from as many different angles. So we want to understand not only in order to understand the object, we need to understand the object from many different angles. And in order to do that, we need to, what do you call it? Like,
triangulate.
it's like using radar to target or to track, to hone in on it, right? So we need to know not only what sort of data, what sort of phenomenological data are occurring to me and what kind of phenomenological data are occurring to you, but also where that data is oriented from, right? So that we can sort of come at this thing from lots of different angles. Now we're talking about a marker, or we're talking about a dye, that's one thing, right? That's in fact, a lot of what we would call the empirical sciences, it's precisely and exactly what they do, right? They engage in the phenomenological analysis of physical entities and therefore look at this physical entity or chemical properties or whatever from various different angles, trying to control for every variable so that they can identify whatever variable they're trying to investigate, the phenomenon that's their object of concern. But we can do the same thing with religion or philosophy or truth or being or anything, really. So as long as we have some sort of vague idea of that phenomenon that we are trying to investigate, and then we begin to identify where we're coming from, how we see it, identify that phenomenon by listening to the experts and by listening to our neighbors who have a certain amount of experience with that phenomenon. Step 4. There is no step 4. There's no step 4. That's it. Phenomenological method. Draw a circle, identify your perspectiving starting point, vaguely identify this phenomenon in the center, and then begin to listen. Listen to the experts about that phenomenon and begin to sort of get a fuller picture of whatever this phenomenon is, and listen to our neighbors who may not be experts but nevertheless have important data to convey to us about any given phenomenon, particularly when we're talking about something as subjectively unique and diverse as religious beliefs, religious practices, and truth or philosophy. Now, I say there is no step 4 in part because step 3 never ends, right? When have you listened to enough experts? Well, the answer to that question is, well, just a few more. When have you listened to enough neighbors? Well, the answer to that is always going to be, well, at least a few more. So we're never going to finish listening to all of the experts. We're never going to stop listening to all of the neighbors. We'll never hear every voice. Therefore, the phenomenological analysis never ends. It's an ongoing process. There's a certain amount of epistemic humility built into phenomenological analysis. Don't need to worry about all that. All you need to know is that this phenomenological method never ends. It's ongoing. There are always more experts to listen to. There's always more data to gather about a particular phenomenon. There are always more neighbors to listen to, particularly if we think not only in spatial terms about neighbors, the neighbor who lives there or the neighbor who lives there, but also those temporal neighbors, like the Buddha or like Jesus or like Muhammad or like Shankara or Nicholas of Cusa or all these other experts that have spoken long, long ago, or even those nameless voices, like those who've written certain scriptures, the Vedas, the Upanishads. Those voices also have something to speak to us. So provided that we are intent on listening to all of these expert and experiential voices, then we are constantly hearing more and more voices into speech. We are constantly listening to more and more experts and neighbors. And the phenomenological analysis flourishes and blossoms and blooms without ever reaching sort of an end, right? There's an openness. The more you know, the more you realize there is to know. So the more we begin to investigate a given phenomenon, the more we realize that phenomenon is connected and interwoven into the fabric of being, such that we can never completely understand that phenomenon unless we understand everything to which it is connected. You know what? Maybe I'm just getting a little too abstract. This is a lot for your first lecture, isn't it? It's time for a beer. Let's grab a beer. I'm going to wipe this away and we will start over.